Hashem's loving grace, we're in our Serene Soul series, refining the gold. In the previous shiurim before the high holidays, we spoke about how verbal abuse is a major soul correction. Not only a soul correction, it's atonement for the soul. Well, a person once asked me, if Hashem is a loving father, well, we talk about how Hashem is a loving father. And I agreed. Someone once said to me, so I agree that Hashem is a father, but heaven forbid, he's an abusive father, heaven forbid. I said, no. When a father doesn't want the child to eat chocolate toffee, that's not an abusive father, that's a protective father, because he doesn't want the child to have 2 holes in another 15 years, 1 hole in his mouth, in his teeth, another hole in his pocket for paying the dental bill. So sometimes Hashem does things that look stern, and we have people that are very dear in our lives, a good military coach, or even a music teacher. If you're excellent a violinist or pianist, a music teacher is not easy, very, very difficult, because demands the best. And a good coach demands the best. Hashem demands the best from us. And when we don't give our best and we do things to blemish the soul, Hashem cleans us the blemish. Just imagine that synagogue services start in a half hour, and little Mikey with his Sabbath best comes home with mud from head to toe. He's been playing in the rainy puddles right before going to synagogue. So mom throws him in the bathroom, and she takes a stiff brush and a stiff soap, and Mikey's yelling, "What a nasty mom, what a mean mom." No, mom's very good. She wants to clean you up. She loves you. She wants to clean you up. She doesn't want you to go into the Sabbath dirty. Hashem doesn't want us to go into a day we call the world to come, a day that's forever Sabbath, the day with blemish in our soul. So the Baal Shem Tov teaches us that we learned in our previous lessons, verbal abuse from one's children is a correction of neshama. Neshama is the highest level of the soul. And just as one really conception begins, people think of the reproductive organs, but it begins in the brain. The male seed comes from the backbone up the spinal column, comes in the brain. It originates in the brain. And that's where the neshama, the highest order of the soul, originates in the brain. So when a person, this the Gemara teaches us, a person has impure thoughts at the time of conception, they strongly influence the children. Very great influence. A person has lofty thoughts and holy thoughts and thoughts of love for his or her spouse at the time of conception has a profound influence on the children. Okay, this is very, very important. And it's not a game. It's not a game. It's something very holy and something very exalted. In other words, we're not prudes. It's just we do things right because we want to bring upright souls into the world. Because the Baal Shem Tov says that verbal abuse from one's children, a person can really blame himself. If you brought cheeky kids into the world, then you must have brought them in the world in a cheeky manner. So we get verbal abuse. We get verbal abuse from the kids to correct what we did. It's a correction for ourselves. And it's not my words, the words of the Baal Shem Tov. Okay, one verbal abuse from one's spouse is a correction of the middle level of the soul. That's the ruach. Okay, that's the middle. So we learn in the beginning of 13 principles of Amunah, the 3 levels of the soul. The basic level of the soul, the basic human soul, it's called nefesh. The intermediate level of the soul is the soul that gives the power of speech. And the beginning power of thought, that's ruach. And the upper level of soul, which is the divine soul, that is neshama. Okay, so the upper level of the soul corresponds to one's thoughts. The intermediate level of the soul, which is ruach, corresponds to one's speech. And the basic level of the soul, nefesh, corresponds to one's deeds. Okay, so I'm going to continue. We didn't finish the Baal Shem Tov's teaching. I'm going to continue it one step further. And the Baal Shem Tov teaches us that insult and humiliation and grief that we have in the course of making a living, this is a correction. It's a soul correction, because everything we learn in the first principle, that everything comes from Hashem. Okay, so it's not, we can't blame the boss. If it's not this boss, it's someone else. It's going to be the customer. And if it's not the customer, it's going to be a coworker. If someone has to get 3 ounces of grief, he's going to get 3 ounces of grief, whether it comes from this area or another area. So it's all for the best. And soul corrections, they're painful, but they're powerful. It's just like taking a hypodermic needle. It doesn't tickle, But sometimes when the body is suffering and has to have a hypodermic needle, has to have been intravenous antibiotic immediately, and it's good for the body. So powerful remedies are sometimes painful. And just as it's not nice to be humiliated in the workplace or in the course of business or in a courtroom or wherever a person is humiliated in the course of making a living. But what's it? So people say, well, what's the gift? What this is an absolution of sin, and to get the correction in this world is 1,000,000 times cheaper than it is to get the correction in the next world, because we feel the fires of humiliation in our face, feel like our face on fire. You know what that saves? That saves the fires of purgatory. If a person gets the humiliation in this world, doesn't get the next world, because there's no double jeopardy. Hashem doesn't punish twice for the same crime. So we have that anguish in this world, and it's bargain basement discounts, a bargain basement correction. So I kind of compare this to refining gold. Okay, that's the name of tonight's show, refining gold. The process of correcting the soul is very similar to refining the gold. Refining the gold could be a metaphor for correcting the soul, because if we look at gold ore or raw gold, I compare raw gold, which is called gold ore, O-R-E, to a raw, uncorrected soul as it comes down to the world. Now, every soul comes down to this world, doesn't come down to the word purified. It comes out to this world to purify itself. And the soul has to purify itself by doing some hard work. And that's why the Torah and the Almighty's commandments, they are the manufacturer's suggested manual to correcting ourselves. Just like if we buy a brand new Toyota or Honda or Mitsubishi, we look in the glove compartment, we've got the manufacturer's manual, how to best take care of the car. And so we have the Torah. Shem gives the Torah to tell how to take care of the soul, the divine soul. Okay, so take the raw gold. What happens when we take raw gold ore out of the earth? It's far from pure. 100% gold, that's 24 karat, because gold is measured 24 carats, that's 100% pure. But no gold that comes out of the ground is 24 karat. Maybe it's 10 karat, maybe it's 14 karat, and the other maybe 40, 50, at most 60, 65% pure. And the rest, it's got all these other alloys. There's other metals in it, and other metals could be silver, copper, it could be lead, and or some basic other chemical compounds. And so to get the pure gold, the gold has to go on a refining process, undergo a refining process. Now, what happens how do we refine gold? How do we get those impurities out? We take gold and we put it in a crucible. A crucible is something that goes into a very hot oven, and it can withstand the highest temperatures. And we expose that gold to temperatures somewhere between 1,800 and 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's really hot. And what happens? The gold melts, and the gold drops down, and it stays on the impurities. They float on the top. You take them, they get scraped right off, and we're left with pure gold. Okay, so the gold it melts at this tremendous high temperature. Well, it's the same thing. We have separate the pure gold from the residue, from the desirable and the undesirable. And that's metaphorically just like what happens with the soul. The soul's mission on earth is to purify itself. And what we have also impurities. The impurities sometimes are blemishes we pick up in this world. And so the impurities are blemishes that we pick up in a previous world or previous life. So what a person is whatever he's doing in this world is a correction of previous lives. And Hashem puts him or her in a situation and circumstances where they have a chance to correct. Okay, so we know who's throwing us in the fire. This is not something sadistical, Father in heaven, heaven forbid. This is that Father in heaven who's a master craftsman, who's heating up the gold because he wants the pure gold. And Hashem wants to bring us up to the next world after a term of duty in this world as pure gold, pure, clear neshamas. Now, what happens when the neshama is clear? When the soul is clear and purified, now the soul can take its place in the highest place in the world to come. In other words, another metaphor like that, now the soul can become part, it's pure gold, it become part of the divine crown. becomes a soul is a part of the divine crown. It's so lofty. I'm just using that. We go and use metaphors because we learn in the third principle of Amunah that Hashem has no physical properties and defies any corporeal properties. And so we just try in human words, because that's what we have, in human vocabulary, to try and describe him so we can get some type of concept, some type of idea. Okay, so why is Hashem suggesting us to the fires of abuse, the fires of humiliation, the fires of embarrassment? Because Hashem doesn't want us in the fires of purgatory. We want to do that. So he gives us this much, much cheaper in this world. And it's just as effective as a 1,800 degree furnace. Okay, so that's the fires of humiliation and insult and embarrassment that are involved in making a living. Okay, so next time, rather than getting angry and losing your temper, being all upset, you close your eyes. Thank you, Hashem. I realize what you do to me. And then people, you'll be so successful in business. You say, wait a second. This the competitor or the customer or the co-worker, the boss did everything in the world to upset this person. He just smiles. This guy's really together. He's really confident. You're going to go high. If you can accept humiliation with a smile on your face and close your eyes and realize it's a gift from Hashem, you're going to be the most sought after person wherever you are and wherever you're doing. It's such charisma where a person under fire can be calm and collected. And this is the power of Amunah. This is the power of Amunah. So a person who suffers insult and verbal abuse in the course of his or her workday, whether it's from employees or employers or customers or bank managers or students or teachers or whoever you're dealing with, okay, feels like somebody burned their soul. It feels like your face is on fire, your soul's on fire. It's embarrassment, like we said, it's just like fire. You feel like your cheeks are on fire. Okay, so a person can remember the metaphor of purifying the gold. That's what's happening to each of us right now as we're suffering the humiliation and embarrassment or whatever it is. Okay, so rather than losing our power or losing our potential and wasting it on anger, then we can take this calmly, realize from Hashem. We don't lose our self-composure and we keep on going and continue to be productive. Don't think that this is just this is in the Gemara. You can't be great without this. If we take our greatest sages, I want the Gemara to take the greatest sages. Tell you about some of the greatest sages in the Talmud. One of them is Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania. Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania was the teacher of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, all of religious law is an argument between him and his learning partner, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus. The Gemara describes their back and forth arguments. They were both students of the great Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, and they argued most of the time, more than 85% of the time, the accepted laws like Rabbi Yeshua. Now, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus, he was a very wealthy family, very rich. Rabbi Yeshua was so poor. Rabbi Yeshua, he made a living as a charcoal burner. He says, the Gemara talks about the shack where he lived, the shack that he called home. And the walls were black because from the burning the charcoal, and it was just a matter of breathing it. It's maybe one of the least prestigious ways of making a living there is, but that's what he had to do so he could sit and learn Torah all day long, and he would burn charcoal all night light to make a few pennies to feed himself. So once after he had a big argument with the great generation, Rabban Gamliel, and Rabban Gamliel disparaged him in public. And the students said to Rabban Gamliel, they said, there's going to be revolt against you. Rabbi Yoshua is so loved. If you don't go and ask his forgiveness, then we're going to appoint another president. Okay, he's a descendant of Hillel, descendant of the Davidic dynasty, Rabban Gamliel. And so Rabban Gamliel went to Rabbi Yeshua's home to placate him to forgiveness. He couldn't believe it when he saw it. He couldn't believe it. He said, this is where you live? And this is such abject poverty? And Rabbi Yeshua said to Rabban Gamliel, This is a report right in the Gemara, Tractate Brachos, page 28a. And he says, you have no idea, because Rabbi Gamliel is also very rich. He says, you have no idea of the sorrow and the disparagement of the poor Torah scholars. And what he had to do with this disparage, make a living. Here he was a great, prodigious Torah scholar. Imagine that can you imagine if you take Professor Emeritus of Law at Cambridge? Okay, Professor Emeritus of Law, Cambridge School of Law, or Oxford School of Law, takes the most prodigious scholar in the most prestigious university. But let's suppose that the UK decided this is such great, we don't pay our professors. They have to work on the side. Okay, so now you take the Professor Emeritus of Law in Oxford, and he's sitting on the back of a trash truck. He's collecting the trash bins in Oxford in the early morning so he could teach in law school. This sounds crazy. This is a nice example compared to what Rabbi Yeshua had to do. Rabbi Yeshua is one of the greatest rabbis, but he won't take a handout. He won't eat from a handout. And he could say, here, great rabbi, great Torah scholar, support me. No, he burned charcoal. And he said all the time, his fingernails were black. The walls of his house were black. No matter how much he scrubbed himself, you get the soot in your pores. You can't get, it would be bitter. He couldn't, it was such a disparagement for himself. He looked like he was dirty all the time, and it would make fun. Okay, but I'm not finished yet. Okay, so he was the teacher of Rabbi Akiva. Now, what about Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva became the father of the oral Torah. Until Rabbi Akiva's time, you couldn't write down the oral Torah. It was only by giving word of mouth. The oral Torah is the Talmud, the Mishnah, and the Gemara. And because it was a Roman occupation and they were killing all the wise men, there was nothing Rabbi Akiva says must be written down, otherwise it's going to be forgotten. Okay, so Rabbi Akiva, he developed a system of writing down the oral Torah that became the Mishnah, but it's very telegraphic and very staccato. So the Gemara explains the Mishnah. This is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is great. Rabbi Akiva was an illiterate migrant worker until he was 40 years old. Rabbi Akiva's parents were poor converts. Okay, and if you're a poor convert, you just think maybe you can have a child like Rabbi Akiva. Okay, so Rabbi Akiva's parents, Akiva ben Yosef, his father Yosef was a convert. Okay, that's Rabbi Akiva's father Yosef. Right. Rabbi Akiva married, he was a migrant worker, and he ended up working by Kalba ben Savoy, who was one of the richest plantation owners in Jerusalem, in the Jerusalem area. And Rabbi Akiva met Rachel, Kalba Savoy's daughter. She saw that he had an impeccable character. She never met a guy with such a wonderful character. And she says, I'll tell you what, if you learn Torah, I'll marry you. He said, you got a deal. So they got married secretly. When her father, he was one of the 3 richest men in all the land of Israel. When her father heard about her, he disowned her. He said, you're out. That's it. You married a poor migrant worker? Let's imagine a princess Di or Lady Di marrying a coal miner from Leeds or whatever. It's crazy. You can't understand the stories in the Gemara. The real, the true. This 3 are people. Sorry, people. Rabbi Akiva, okay, he made a deal. He's going to learn Torah, but now Rabbi Akiva is 45, and he's got a 4.5-year-old son, and he's been married. He made a deal with his wife, so it's time to take the son to first grade. Time to take first grade to learn Aleph Beis. So Rachel said to him, go to first grade with your son. Learn the ABCs, learn the Aleph Beis, the Hebrew alphabet. Okay, he was so embarrassed, and everybody was making fun of him. So what she did to ease his embarrassment, she made a donkey. She took a donkey and put mud on the donkey's back, and then planted a flower bed, planted geraniums on the donkey's back. Okay, and so Rabbi Akiva went to first grade with his son, carrying his donkey, And everybody's looking, laughing. They weren't laughing at Rabbi Akiva going to first grade. Now they're laughing at the donkey flower pot. Hey, have you ever seen a donkey flower pot? Okay. So he came back and Rachel said, well, what happened? He said, everybody laughed at me. And then the second day, everybody laughed at the flower pot. He says, okay, they'll laugh at you for 3 days. They'll laugh at the donkey flower pot 3 days. Afterward, nobody can say anything. And that's why he went through this embarrassment, suffered it. And then he learned Torah for 40 years. He taught Torah for 40 years. And it became, they amassed 24,000 students. But 24,000 students didn't properly treat one another with respect. And so they all died because they weren't qualified in passing Rabbi Akiva's Torah. So Rabbi Akiva eventually passes Torah down through 7, some say 5, some say 7 main Talmidim. Amongst who were Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who codified the Zohar, Rabbi Meir Balanes, and Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai. Okay, so now talking about Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, talking about disparagement. We're talking about the greatest rabbis in the Gemara suffered such disparagement in making a living and learning Torah. Lo is the low. So Rabbi Yeshua, he was a coal burner. Rabbi Akiva was a migrant worker. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai. So the religious law comes through Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, even though according to the esoteric law in Kabbalah, it's like the teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but according to the real law, it's like the teachings of Rabbi Meir Balanes and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was a jug maker, ceramics, worked in mud all the time. He rolled mud and made jugs. Rabbi Yehuda was so poor, it used to be that if you wanted to sit down in the study hall, you had to bring your own chair. Like you bring your own chair, you could sit down in the study hall. If you didn't have a chair, you have to sit on the floor. And it's not comfortable to sit on the floor, to learn all day long sitting on the floor. So Rabbi Yehuda couldn't afford a chair. So he'd come every day with a jug on his back. A jug on his shoulder. Go on the door. That's right there. He comes with a jug on his shoulder. Everybody laugh at him. Look, he can't even afford a chair. He comes with a jug. And he'd sit on the jug to learn Torah. And people thought this was funny. Every single day he suffered ridicule. He couldn't walk into the study hall with that ridicule. Yeah. So the ridicule, our sage, this is part of it. But look what happens. We don't know anything in the Gemara about the people who ridiculed. But the ones who suffered the ridicule, they became the greatest because they handled the ridicule with emunah. It's Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania and Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai. That's right. If you can accept the tribulation, because a person's prestige means a lot to him. A person's prestige means much. If a person can think about emunah by the time he's being disparaged under fire, under the fire's embarrassment and humiliation, you're going to be great. You're going to be great. It's right. It's a template right in the Talmud. Person's going to be great. Okay, and we see this. We see this in our luminaries. We see this in Rabbi Yeshua. We see this in Rabbi Akiva, and we see this in Rabbi Yehuda. And the difficulties and disparagement that they suffered, it purified their souls to such an extent that they were able to bring the pure Torah knowledge down to subsequent generations. Now, the one thing that we learn in the Midrash says, we say, why did our sages do such a lonely work? They were such great Torah scholars. They didn't want to make a living out of the Torah. They didn't want money from the Torah. This is they'll work. And why did they work? But let it be a handout. They didn't want a handout. So the worst disparagement is not being poor. The worst disparagement is being dependent on a handout, dependent on other people. Okay. So a lot of times, look, we all have difficulties. If I make a survey like this, okay, somebody's got difficulty with an employer, and somebody's got difficulty with a client, and somebody's got difficulty with an employee, and somebody's got a really nasty bank manager, and somebody's got a nasty teacher, and somebody's got a cheeky student. If I go down the list, everybody has got something going. Okay, but it's also a correction. And this is part of it. So why does Hashem give each one of this? That, okay, say it's, I get a lot of people that ask me, they want to change jobs. So I ask them, do you have an alternate job? Do you have another job offer? No. I have somebody just recently, a married couple in the United States. I'm going to say where, but the person hated his boss. I know this family for a while, and wherever this guy works, there's something he hates. Okay, so he skips around. He can't hold a place to work. So I try and strengthen him. Muna said, look, there's no garden of roses. It's not, this is not the world to come. We're in the human world. You got to pay your dues somewhere. Somewhere. Something is difficult. Okay, the Gemara says there's a path that's thorny in the beginning and smooth in the end, and the path that's smooth in the beginning and thorny in the end. Okay, so people look for the easy street in this world, and then they got to pay the price afterwards. That's no good. Be happy that we're paying the price now, and then afterward it's going to be easy street. It's guaranteed. It's guaranteed. Sign check from the Gemara. Right. So guy leaves recently leaves a place of employment without having something else. He says, oh, I'm not worried about it. I'm going to have plenty of place of employment. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, the guy's out of a job. The Gemara in Tractate Nedarim says that if a wife doesn't have grain in the granary, she's going to yell. She's going to yell. She's going to have a short fuse, because if a woman doesn't know what's in the pantry to feed the kids at night, she's going to be a little bit short-tempered, right? So it's a man's responsibility to make sure there's something in the pantry. Okay, that's the first thing. So the worst disparagement in the world is when there's nothing in the pantry. That's poverty is the worst disparagement. But even worse than poverty is being dependent on a handout. So that way, if we look at it that way, verbal abuse with a paycheck is much better than no verbal abuse with no paycheck. Somebody sitting at home, oh yeah, he doesn't have a problem with the boss anymore, doesn't have problems with customers anymore, doesn't have a paycheck anymore. Okay, that is a much worse form of disparagement. Okay, so we look at the verbal abuse we suffer at work, and I call it a bargain basement absolution, because it really cleans us up. The Almighty is a loving Father, and He has infinite love for His children on earth, for all of them. So oftentimes He converts a very severe punishment for some form of minor punishment, and that severe punishment could be incurred by some type of wrongdoing. Maybe somebody gossiped on the telephone. Maybe somebody said slander about someone, even something that is just something didn't even pay attention to. And maybe the person is something people don't pay attention to. They suffer all types of difficulties. And I asked them about, you go to synagogue? Oh, yeah, I go to synagogue. You talk in synagogue? Oh, well, do you take your cell phone to synagogue? Oh, yeah, well, okay. You check your text messages during the prayer? That's disparaging the Almighty. Oh, no, Almighty, you don't interest me in a moment, heaven forbid. My text messages interest me more. Wow, if you did that in Buckingham Palace, it'd be off with your head. The king, you disrespect the king's talking to you, and you turn around and talk to somebody else. No, that's a gross disrespect. You wouldn't do that in Buckingham Palace. So I do it to the King of Kings. People do things and they incur punishments, and then they complain about it. But the punishments are not punishments, they're corrections of the soul. That's the mom's stiff brush to get the mud off of little Johnny. Okay, so as in our example of refining the gold, the Almighty doesn't want to, He's a loving Father. He doesn't want to throw His children in a fiery furnace. And He doesn't want to do that to purify their souls. Instead, He sends us a cheap substitute. And the cheap substitute for the fiery furnace is a bit of humiliation or embarrassment or verbal abuse, or someone calls us a fool or a nincompoop or something not so complimentary. Okay, so that's the cheap substitute for a lot worse suffering. And otherwise, we're suffering. If you would ask in the heavenly court what type of atonement a person would need for such a blemish, oh, they give the book according to the book atonement. Okay, this is a blend, 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. And the Almighty doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to burn His children. Okay, so we feel like our souls are on fire and embarrassment. Let's give a little bit of embarrassment. All right, first accept it with love, and the Almighty considers that adequate penance. And finish down the road. Put a smile on your face. Okay, and person is erased the bargain basement punishment. Just imagine that you haven't paid your mortgage for 6 months. You're overdrawn at the bank. $100,000, 100,000 quid, whatever your currency is. Okay, even more. The business, your suppliers running after you, and you've taken extra loans in the bank, haven't paid them back. And the bank manager calls you in, and the bank manager says, tell you what, I am going to tell you now for 2 minutes, 120 seconds, you owe $120,000. For 120 seconds, I'm going to tell you how stupid you are. I'm going to tell you what a fool you are. I'm going to tell you what an idiot you are for 120 seconds. And after 120 seconds, your debt is clean. Okay. You owe 120,000 quid at the bank, $120,000. And the bank manager is going to yell at you for 120 seconds. And your debt is white clean. Who would refuse a debt like that? A deal like that? Who's going to refuse a deal like that? Okay. For 2 minutes, now your debt of $120,000 white clean. That's exactly the way verbal abuse in the course of making living work. Exactly what it is. You get that? And whatever escalate, it's wiped clean. It's a great, that's why I call it a bargain basement absolution. And people get all upset. They're going, upset. This is with Emunah. We don't kick our tribulations. We welcome them. We don't look for them. We don't run after tribulations. Where are you? Come. No. But if we already have, if Hashem sends them already, then they're the greatest thing in the world. So despite our best efforts at good behavior, King Solomon says there's nobody on earth that never sins. Okay. Every one of us from time to time, we get ourselves dirty. And but a lot of people, they don't do daily self-reckoning. They don't assess themselves. So they're like a person with a wallet full of credit cards and doesn't think about what to pay at the end of the month. You got to pay the credit card bills. You go, oh, do that thing, charge it, and then the bill comes, oh, and it's shocking, the bill comes. And this is what happens. And they think they could go and they never have to pay. We have to know we're all liable for everything we do. We're liable, and the heavenly journal, we learned in Pirkei Avot that everything we did it's still like a store right down in credit. We have credits and debits, everything. And so who could say that their thoughts, speech, and deeds around the clock are completely according to the Almighty's will? They haven't done anything wrong. Okay, so the worst imaginable thing is to finish our tour of duty on this earth and have things that haven't been paid for, because now you have to pay the price in the next world, and that is no good. That is no pleasure. We don't want to go there. We want to pay all our debts in this world and then come to the next world clean. And because to come into the next world with debts that haven't been, it's blemishes, sins that haven't been atoned for. So imagine you've been invited to a royal black tie banquet, black tie and evening gown banquet, and the person's got stains on his collar, egg stains on his collar, or ridiculous, tremendously embarrassing. Or you walk into the ballroom with muddy shoes. They do this. It's so embarrassing. And that's walking into the next world. We should be walking impeccably clean and impeccably pure, and coming with muddy shoes. They won't let us in. Not only that, be punished for that. We don't go there. Okay, so nothing in the world so effectively cleanses a person and quickly and effectively at such a low price. It's a little bit of verbal abuse. So we look at the verbal abuse, and that's completely a little bit of insult, a little bit of shame. It's healthy. It keeps us modest. It keeps us from getting to arrogance. The arrogant person can't be close to Hashem. Because as painful as they are, they're a lot better than a terminal disease, and a lot better than a head-on collision, and a lot better than some type of really difficult, unspeakable tribulation. I want to tell you a story that I saw with my own eyes. I'm going to change the identities a little bit. It's a true story, and I have one of the greatest rabbis in the generation can attest to it, because he knows about it also. Okay, the story I saw in my own eyes, someone very close to me, and let's call him Ralph. Okay, Ralph was a waiter in one of Israel's most prestigious restaurants. You have in the town of Caesarea, by the town of Jaffa, over the Jaffa port. Is this old, really, and also town of Akko, where the ancient ports are. They have these fancy restaurants that overlook the ancient port, overlook the Mediterranean, gorgeous. And the restaurants like that, they're really high priced and expensive. Only the rich tourists go there and the diplomats go there. That's the type of people. Okay, well, Ralph, he has a degree, a master's degree in education, but he works as a waiter at one of these restaurants because he can make one night in tips what more than he can make a whole week as a salary as a teacher. Okay. And he's just rather take care of the diplomats and take care of the cheeky high school kids. He tried that. Right. He left teaching high school with his master's degree in education to become a waiter. Okay, he's a waiter. And he's a great waiter. And these are places that you've got, maybe for one job as a waiter, 20 people want that job. Okay, but they only take the restaurants can, such classy, posh restaurants can pick the best of the best. Okay, so Ralph was one of the best of the best in these waiters. All right. So one night they were really, really busy, and it was some type of international gathering in Jerusalem, and there were diplomats, and they were there, and the diplomats, they take them to the fancy places, to the port of Jaffa, to port of Caesarea, Akko. And there are a lot of diplomats and Israeli Knesset members, and the highest of the high echelon in Israeli society was in this restaurant, plus visiting dignitaries. Okay, so one evening, Hashem decided to give Ralph two left hands. They had two left hands. So here, Ralph was serving the guy, paid the table, they ordered the champagne. So he opens the champagne. This is faux pas number one. Faux pas number one, he opens the champagne, and the cork, boom, hits him right in the eye, right in the eyes. Okay, whole restaurant breaks out laughing. Have you seen the waiter where the pork got fried ahead? Not only that, but then the champagne must have been overly effervescent. Okay, champagne all over his impeccable waiter's clothes. He's dressed like a tuxedo, like a waiter's tuxedo, and it all over him. He's soaked in champagne. He now reeks of champagne, and he got hit between the eyes with that. He was so flustered, so he ran back in the kitchen to look for one of the cleanup boys. This restaurant has two what they call bus boys that clean up the tables and mop the floors, this and that. He couldn't find a bus boy. So here he had this puddle on the floor right there, and so he grabs the mop himself. His fancy waiter type, grab the mop, and he starts mopping up the mess himself. And now faux pas number two. All of a sudden, while mopping up the thing, he loses his feet. His feet are up in the air. He slips in champagne, and boom, he lands right on his derriere, right in the puddle of champagne. Well, the whole restaurant, they're rolling in laughter. And Ralph's face is turning red and blue and every color of the rainbow, like a sunset. And he doesn't know what to do. So he flustered. He goes back in the kitchen. He grabs a new tablecloth, but the tablecloth's got to change. The tablecloth got to change the surface. And he takes the tablecloth and he slips again. He pulls off the whole tablecloth and crystal on the floor. And now the champagne on the floor, broken crystal, tablecloth. It turned in from a posh restaurant to a circus. And rolling in laughter, and he's the brunt of all this laughter. Well, Ralph, he doesn't know. He changed his shirt, and on automatic pilot, he was like in shock. The last hour and a half or 2 hours of work, he finished. It was like a zombie in shock, automatic. Finally closed the restaurant, and that evening of purgatory was over for him. So he gets into his car. He had this little Fiat 500, and he gets into this car, and he goes out on the freeway on the way home. And as he goes out on the freeway, and he's so tired, he doesn't know what to do. He's got tears in his eyes. It's such a painful day. Just as he gets on the freeway, this great big semi 18-wheeler almost knocks him off the road, misses him by a hair's breadth. He could feel it, just the whoosh of the truck went past him, almost knocked him over. And he just had a catharsis. He went aside the road. He cried for 5 minutes. Ralph called me that night. Called me that night, told me exactly what happened to him. And I said, I think I know what's going on to you. Then I talked to Ralph. I said, listen, I'll be right back with you. Let me double check something. I called the Melitzer Rebbe, my spiritual guide, who's a descendant of the Baal Shem Tov we spoke about. And the Melitzer Rebbe says, okay, he says he could say the Golno prayer on Shabbat, but he has to know the disparagement he suffered saved his life. The Melitzer Rebbe told me that there was a decree on his head. There was a decree, there was a demand for his life. Okay, so what Hashem did, Hashem plea bargained, that rather than taking away Ralph's life, his loving Shem didn't want to take away his life. Hashem took away his prestige, gave him an hour and a half of anguish, an hour and a half of tremendous embarrassment, an hour and a half, and he got his life back. And his car came out unscratched. He had a good cry and a good catharsis. And next day he was back in business. Okay. So Ralph was a lucky guy. He got an answer. That's done. This is the first-hand story. Okay, isn't that the first-hand? I get vouch for the story, and the Melitzer Rebbe can vouch for the story. Okay. First-hand. We don't always see what our abuse, our suffering does for us. But I promise you, if you have suffering from your spouse, don't divorce her. Okay, thank you. It's a cleanup. Just treat her nice and you get treated nice back. If you have suffering from your kids, thank you, Hashem. This is to clean myself up of old business. I have suffering at the workplace. Okay, this is to clean up my nefesh. This is to clean up my rule. This is to clean up. Hashem is cleaning up every level of the soul. It's all for the best. So now, beloved brothers and sisters, I ask you a question. Think of a recent bit of suffering, especially at making a living, a recent bit of suffering. Now, do this. Close your eyes and smile and imagine that you've just completed a plea bargaining with an angel of mercy who, in your behalf, spoken to the Almighty, and the Almighty agreed to waiver a head-on collision, a terminal illness, bankruptcy, something really bad, for a tiny little bit of humiliation, a tiny little bit of embarrassment, a tiny little bit of abuse. Okay, now open your eyes, and what do you think of the abuse? It's not abuse anymore. It's a gift. It's a gift from the Almighty. So you don't have to don't sacrifice your self-composure. Don't give it away to anyone. It's you give away the gift from Hashem, and we can maintain that self-composure. We have emunah and realize in our heart that if Hashem gives us difficulties, it's the greatest deal in our life, and all our spiritual debts have been paid for a bargain basement price. And we should all have pure, clean souls, and all have pleasure and happiness and success and real happiness that we feel is happiness. And Hashem should bless you with all your heart's wishes for the best. Amen.